Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. We read every single one. We want to know how far this story travels. If this moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What happens next, and what this dog did in that parking lot, is something no one who was there that morning will ever forget. Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox, United States Marine Corps, retired, was 39 years old, and looked it in all the ways that mattered and none of the ways that didn't. He was 6 feet even, 215 pounds, built from 7 years of service and 18 months of steady physical work on a 40-acre property outside Whitefish, Montana, where he'd been trying, with incomplete success, to become a quieter version of himself. Hair was black and kept short from habit. His jaw was wide and squared, the kind of face that had been assembled for function rather than presentation, with a scar that ran a clean quarter-inch below his left eye, where a piece of windshield glass had found him during a vehicle rollover outside. Kandahar in 2019, his eyes were a dark, settled green that people occasionally described, without being able to explain why, as patient, not soft, patient. The specific quality of stillness that belongs to men who have spent years reading rooms for information that might save their lives, who have long since learned that stillness communicates more than movement. He'd done 2 deployments with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, Helmand Province in 2018, and Kandahar the following year, the second of which ended with the rollover, the scar, a right knee rebuilt with hardware that showed up on metal detectors and ached in cold weather, with the dependable accuracy of a barometer. He'd been medically separated in late 2020 and had spent 3 years deciding what to do with himself, which mostly meant he'd bought property in Flathead County and was in the process of not deciding. He had a contract with a private security consulting firm that took maybe 10 hours a week. He had the property. He had Shadow. He'd come to Whitefish that morning for a hardware run and coffee, in that order, because the property's water heater had developed an attitude problem, and the nearest hardware store was 40 minutes out, and he had been awake since 5. He had not come looking for anything. In his experience, what needed finding had a way of presenting itself. Shadow had been teaching him this for 2 years. Shadow was a 6-year-old German Shepherd with a coat the color of dark amber and midnight, black, along his spine and muzzle, amber burning through his chest and legs. He weighed 82 pounds of clean, deliberate muscle. His right ear bore a pale crease where shrapnel had opened it during a building clearance in Kandahar, healed into a permanent tilt that made him look like he was always asking a question. He'd been a military working dog with the 3rd Marine Division for 4 years. Cole had spent 6 months navigating the adoption process before loading him into the truck for the drive north. Shadow had not looked back. Cole had once, then he'd stopped. Shadow moved with his eyes, not frantically but methodically, his gaze traveling a scene the way experienced operators clear a building. He did not react to noise. He reacted to meaning, and when he found it, his body communicated it with a clarity that required no translation. Cole had stepped out of the truck that morning into the clean cold of a late October morning in Flathead County. The kind of air that came off the mountains at this time of year and made the world feel recently laundered, sharp and pale and still. Shadow had stepped down after him and settled at his left knee without command. They had walked 15 feet toward the coffee shop before Shadow stopped. Not a hesitation, a stop. Complete and deliberate, the dog's entire weight shifting back onto his haunches, his ears coming fully forward, his eyes fixing on a point ahead with the focused attention that Cole had learned, over 2 years, to treat as information rather than obstacle. Cole looked where the dog was looking. The old man was almost to the coffee shop door, moving with the careful forward momentum of someone whose body requires negotiation rather than command. He was somewhere north of 70, wearing a canvas jacket, the color of old tobacco, and a veteran's cap, with the 7th Infantry Division insignia above the brim. His cane was aluminum, the adjustable kind from a medical supply shop. He moved with the dignity of a man who had decided long ago not to apologize for the pace at which he traveled, which was the only dignity available to him, and which he carried with complete steadiness. The boy in the lacrosse hoodie was doing his impression again. The limp, the dangling arms. His friends were watching, laughing, watching the old man to see if he noticed. The old man's jaw tightened once, barely perceptible, and he kept walking. Shadow growled. Not loudly, not as a performance, a low, precise sound from deep in the chest, directed and specific, the kind of sound that carries meaning without needing volume, like a statement delivered at conversation level that somehow fills a room. The boy in the hoodie heard it. He turned. Cole was already moving. He crossed the distance between the truck and the three boys at a pace that was not a run and not a walk and did not look like either. Shadow moved at his left knee, matching him stride for stride, ears fully forward, body lowered 2 degrees from neutral. The posture Cole recognized as watchful rather than aggressive, which was somehow more unsettling to people who understood the difference. The boys saw them coming. The laughter stopped. The one who'd been performing the limp straightened up. Cole stopped 6 feet away and looked at the boy in the hoodie for a moment without speaking. He looked at the old man, who had paused near the door, cane-gripped, watching. "You all right, sir?" Cole said to the old man, not to the boys. To the old man. The old man looked at Cole. He looked at Shadow. Something shifted in the old man's expression, small but real. The way a face changes when it recognizes a language it thought no one nearby spoke. "Fine," he said. "Just out for coffee. We'll walk in with you," Cole said. He moved to hold the door and did not look at the 3 boys again. Shadow, however, did not move. He remained where he was, positioned between the boys and the old man, and looked at the boy in the lacrosse hoodie with the specific, hurried attention of an animal who has permanently suspended doubt about his own capacity, and has nothing to prove and knows it. The boy took a half step back without deciding to. Inside, Cole bought 2 coffees and brought one to the old man at the window table without asking. The old man accepted it with the particular grace of someone who does not receive unexpected kindness often enough to be casual about it, but has enough dignity to receive it without making it into a production. His name was Vernon Cahill. He was 73 years old, served with the 7th Infantry Division as a medic, Fort Ord, 1972, separated in 1975 after his second posting. He had a son in Kalispell and a daughter in Spokane and a wife named Patricia who had died 18 months ago from pancreatic cancer, and whom he still talked about in the present tense when he wasn't paying attention. He told Cole about the knee replacement 4 years ago, and the hip that needed to go next and hadn't yet because he was still working through the VA, wait time on the pre-authorization which had been pending since March. He didn't mention the boys outside. He didn't need to. Shadow sat beside Vernon's chair for the duration of the coffee and pressed his head once, briefly, against Vernon's thigh, unprompted, unhurried, contact that lasted maybe 4 seconds before he lifted his head and returned to watchfulness. Vernon's hand found the dog's fur without looking, the way hands find things that belong there. The boy in the lacrosse hoodie was Garrett Whitfield, age 18, a senior at Flathead Valley Prep. He was the kind of person who had been allowed to become what he was by a combination of money, proximity, the absence of anyone willing to apply friction. His father was Bryce Whitfield, who had made a considerable fortune in commercial real estate development across Flathead and Lake counties, and who sat on 2 municipal advisory boards and had a professional relationship with the local chamber of commerce that provided him a particular insulation from inconvenience. Garrett Whitfield had been asked to leave 2 different sports programs for conduct issues, and had not, in either case, experienced anything that his family could describe as consequences. His 2 companions that morning, Tyler Rourke and Derek Cass, were satellites, his orbit, present and laughing and complicit in the particular way that witnesses who do nothing are complicit, which is completely. Cole had learned what he needed to learn about Garrett Whitfield by the time he finished his coffee, not through any investigation, but because Whitefish was the size of place where information moved at the speed of conversation, and the woman behind the counter, 52-year-old named Carla, who had grown up there, and whose son had played lacrosse with kids from Flathead Prep, had offered the relevant context without being asked once she understood what had happened in the parking lot. She'd seen it before, she said. Garrett and his group were regulars on Ridgeline Avenue on weekend mornings. She'd watched him knock a display off the front sidewalk of the bookstore, 2 doors down in September, and walk away laughing. Nobody had said anything, she said, because his father was on the board of the Whitefish Business Association, and because saying something had a way of becoming complicated when certain family names were attached to the thing you'd said something about. Cole listened to all of this. He drank his coffee. He nodded once when Carla finished. He walked Vernon Cahill to his car. The 3 boys were gone from the front of the coffee shop by then, moved on to whatever the rest of their Saturday held. Vernon unlocked his car with a keypad on the door handle, the kind of assist that made getting in easier without requiring help. Cole noticed it with the attention he gave all adaptive details without commenting on them. Vernon paused before getting in. "Didn't have to do that," Vernon said. "Yes, sir," Cole said. "I did." Vernon looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at Vernon. "What branch?" "Marines." "2 deployments." Vernon nodded slowly. "Medic Army, 72 to 75. He extended his hand. Cole shook it. Vernon got in his car and drove south on Ridgeline. Cole stood at the curb for a moment watching him go, Shadow at his side. He took out his phone and made a call. The person he called was a former gunnery sergeant named Roy Paxton, had separated from the Corps 3 years before Cole, and who now ran a veterans advocacy nonprofit based in Kalispell with specific programming around elder veteran services, financial navigation, and access to VA benefits. Cole had connected with Paxton through a mutual contact at the county VA office 6 months prior, and had helped him with a security audit of Paxton's nonprofit headquarters in exchange for a conversation about the gap between available VA services and the veterans actually receiving them in Flathead County. He trusted Paxton's judgment, and more specifically trusted Paxton's knowledge of how systems worked and who inside those systems could be reached. Cole described Vernon Cahill, name, branch, unit, approximate age, current VA status, the pending pre-authorization from March. Paxton listened without interrupting. "I know someone in the regional benefits office," Paxton said. "I'll make a call Monday." "Appreciate it," Cole said. "The hip thing has been going on since March. That's what he told me." A pause. "That's a long time to wait to stop hurting." "Yes," Cole said. "It is." He didn't mention Garrett Whitfield on that call. That was a separate matter, and he handled separate matters separately. Over the following 2 days, Cole made inquiries, not aggressively, deliberately. He spoke with Carla again, with the owner of the bookstore 2 doors down, a man named Paul Hensley who had been in Whitefish for 20 years, and who confirmed the September incident and 3 others dating back to the previous spring, including one in which Garrett Whitfield had berated a teenage girl working cafe on the avenue who had gotten his order wrong and had done so at volume, and with language that had cleared the front of the cafe and left, the girl in tears in the back room for 40 minutes. Paul Hensley had not filed a complaint. He'd started to, he said, then remembered who Garrett's father was, and thought about his commercial lease, which came up for renewal in February, and decided against it. He said this without pride. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, explaining to themselves enough times that the shame has worn down to something that only hurts when examined directly. Cole made notes. He made 3 more calls. One to the manager of the lacrosse facility where Garrett had been asked to leave the program. The manager had documented the incident, and the documentation was in a file that a county social services investigator could compel if the process were initiated. one to a former Marine in his network who now worked in financial investigation for the State Attorney General's office and who knew what the threshold was for a formal complaint to county social services regarding harassment of a protected class, which veterans over 65 qualified as under Montana Code, and one to a reporter at the Flathead Beacon named Sarah Croft who had written 3 pieces in the past 18 months about the culture of impunity in Whitefish's private school social scene, and who answered on the second ring and said, when Cole had finished explaining, "I've been trying to get someone to give me this on the record for 4 months." Cole said he'd think about the record part. He asked her to meet him for coffee on Wednesday. She agreed. Shadow spent those 2 days moving between the property in Flathead County and Whitefish with Cole. On the morning Cole drove back to Ridgeline Avenue for the Wednesday meeting with Sarah Croft, the dog rode with the still, forward-focused attention that Cole had come to recognize as readiness without urgency, parked on Ridgeline 3 minutes before the meeting time. Shadow stepped out of the truck. His ears went forward. Garrett Whitfield and Tyler Rourke were coming out of the coffee shop. Shadow did not growl. He stopped. He moved 2 careful steps to position himself between Cole and the 2 young men and sat down and looked at Garrett Whitfield, held the look with an absolute and unhurried calm that communicated, to anyone with enough experience to read it, that the dog was not certain about what this situation was. The hackles along Shadow's spine rose 1 degree. His amber eyes did not move. The sit was not a submission posture. It was a choice. Garrett Whitfield stopped walking. He looked at the dog and then at Cole, and something moved across his face that was not fully fear, but was adjacent to it in the way that genuine uncertainty is adjacent to fear when a person understands for the first time that they are not the most important variable in a given situation. "You're the guy from the other day," Garrett said. His voice had less altitude to it than it had in the parking lot. "I am," Cole said. He introduced himself by name and rank. He told Garrett, without heat or hurry, he had spoken with 4 people on Ridgeline Avenue about the incidents over the past year, that he had the name of the manager at the lacrosse facility, that he had a contact at the county social services office who was reviewing the threshold for a formal complaint regarding pattern harassment of elderly individuals, that he had a meeting in approximately 4 minutes with a reporter who had been covering this particular story for several months. He said all of this the way he'd been trained to communicate under pressure. Factually, completely, without any decoration, volume appropriate for a conversation between 2 adults on a public sidewalk. "What I'm asking you to do," Cole said, "is simple. First, you go back into that coffee shop, and you find whoever is working today, and you apologize to them for the incident in September. By name, specifically for what you did. Second, you write a letter to Vernon Cahill. I'll give you his address, and you apologize, not generally, for what you did in this parking lot on Saturday. Third, you leave this avenue alone for a while. That's it. 3 things." Garrett stared at him. "Or what?" Cole looked at him for a moment without answering. Shadow continued to sit, perfectly still, watching Garrett with the patient attention of an animal who has no deadline and no anxiety and no doubt. "Or the next conversation you have about Saturday," Cole said, "will be with the reporter. The one after that will be with the social services office. And the one after that will be with your father, after he reads about it." He paused. "You've spent your whole life assuming things don't have consequences. That assumption is incorrect. Today is the day you find out." Tyler Rourke had stepped backward. He was looking at the sidewalk. Garrett Whitfield stood for a long moment. He was 18 years old and large, and had until very recently operated in a world where his size and his father's name had been sufficient to end most conversations before they reached this point. This conversation had not ended. The man standing across from him had a stillness about him that Garrett's body understood, even if his mind was still negotiating, the specific stillness of someone who has been genuinely dangerous in places that do not appear on most people's maps and who is currently choosing, deliberately and visibly, not to deploy that. Garrett Whitfield went back into the coffee shop. Cole stood on the sidewalk. Shadow, after a moment, stood too, and pressed himself briefly against Cole's left leg, which he did sometimes in the quiet after a thing had resolved, the contact brief and specific, and then he sat back down and watched the door. 7 minutes later, Garrett Whitfield came out of the coffee shop. He didn't look at Cole. He turned and walked north on Ridgeline Avenue and did not look back. The woman inside, whose name was Jess, and who had been behind the counter on the day in September, came out 20 seconds after Garrett left. She stood in the doorway and looked at Cole. He apologized, she said. She sounded uncertain, as though she wasn't sure the thing she'd just experienced was real. Good, Cole said. Bryce Whitfield called Cole's cell phone on Thursday morning, which meant someone had told him by Wednesday night, which was about what Cole had expected. The call lasted 11 minutes. Bryce Whitfield's voice had the particular quality of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in most rooms he entered, which is a specific kind of confidence, and it made the parts of the conversation where he was clearly improvising more visible than he intended. He used the phrase, "getting ahead of this," twice. He asked what Cole wanted. Cole said he wanted Vernon Cahill's VA pre-authorization for hip surgery expedited. He wanted a formal written apology delivered to Vernon Cahill by Garrett Whitfield, and he wanted the incidents on Ridgeline Avenue to stop. Bryce Whitfield said that was reasonable. Cole said he thought so too. The VA pre-authorization for Vernon Cahill's hip surgery was approved in the third week of November, 8 months after it had been submitted, following an inquiry from Roy Paxton's contact in the Regional Benefits Office. The surgery was scheduled for January. Cole drove Vernon to the consultation appointment on a Tuesday in December. Shadow in the back seat, Vernon wore his 7th Infantry Division cap and talked about Patricia the whole way. In the present tense, Cole listened and did not correct the tense. Garrett Whitfield's letter to Vernon Cahill arrived on a Thursday in late November. It was 3 paragraphs long and was, by any measure, more complete and more specific than anyone who knew Garrett Whitfield would have predicted. Vernon read it twice. He set it on his kitchen table and didn't say much about it for a few days. Then he called Cole one evening and said, "Think he meant part of it." Cole said he thought so too. Vernon said that's enough. Cole said he agreed. By February, Vernon Cahill was 6 weeks post-surgery and walking with a noticeably lighter step. Still the cane, likely always the cane, but the weight behind it different. The negotiation between body and forward motion less effortful. He and Cole had coffee on Ridgeline Avenue on the second Saturday of the month. They sat at the window table, the one they'd sat at in October. Shadow lay between their chairs with his chin on the floor and his eyes on the room, ears rotating in the slow, systematic way he moved through spaces that held no threat. Vernon told Cole about Patricia's garden, which he was thinking about planting again in the spring. Tomatoes mainly, because Patricia had been specific about tomatoes. Cole said he had a property with good south-facing exposure and too much space for one person and a dog if Vernon wanted to come out and look at the soil sometime. Vernon looked at him over the coffee cup. "You don't have to keep doing things for me," Vernon said. "I know," Cole said. Vernon looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at Vernon. The dog's tail moved once, slow and deliberate, a single arc that meant, in the language Cole had spent 2 years learning to read, that the moment was good and the room was safe and whatever was happening here was the right thing. Vernon said he'd come out and look at the soil. Sometimes grace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with ceremony or fanfare or the particular drama we've been taught to associate with the moments that change things. Sometimes it arrives in a parking lot on an ordinary Saturday in October, through a dog who stops walking and looks where he needs to look and holds his position until the person beside him understands. Sometimes it is as simple as a cup of coffee placed in front of a man who expected nothing or as slow and deliberate as a letter that arrives on a Thursday when it was never expected to arrive at all. The world is full of people who have spent their entire lives carrying the weight of service and sacrifice and loss, and who now walk a little slower than they used to, through spaces that don't always make room for them, past people who don't always see them. God places people in those spaces for a reason. He places dogs there for a reason too. The question he asks us, every single day, on every single street, is whether we will stop when the moment requires stopping, or whether we will keep driving and wonder later if someone else took care of it. Someone like Vernon Cahill is not waiting for a hero. He is simply trying to get from his car to the door. The least we can do is hold it open. The most we can do is stay. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder today that there are still people paying attention. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever seen someone show up for a stranger the way Cole showed up for Vernon, tell us that story too. Your words matter more than you know. If you believe in stories of service and quiet courage and the kind of loyalty that walks on four legs, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey we take together. May God bless you, protect your family, keep you watchful for the ones on the sidewalk who are just trying to make it to the door.